Okay, out of respect for everybody's time, we're going to dive right in. No, not quite yet. I'm Lori Ward. I'm fortunate enough to be CEO of Washington's National Park Fund. We serve Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks, and just serve as managers of their charitable gifts that come in. We raise the money and then distribute them, the dollars, back out to the parks at the end of the year. We've been growing strong for the past several years. We have a dynamic and hardworking board of directors of 22 people. We have a staff of 7. We're raising anywhere from $1.5 to $2.5 million a year. And we're actually having a pretty good year this year. And so we're thankful, very, very thankful for that. We work closely with the parks. The superintendents of the 3 parks are on our board as advisors. And we enjoy the relationship that we have with them very much. Let's see, our mission is, or our vision for the parks is that they grow strong and vibrant, youthful and everlasting. We love that line and believe in it and hold true to it as we serve the parks. With COVID-19 upon us, we decided that we would create these programs and bring the parks to you. If you can't get out to the parks, we're bringing them to you. This is probably our 8th, and all of the previous programs are on our website. Great to go back in and watch them. And so with that, we're gonna dive right in and have a little fun. Excuse me. It's my privilege to introduce to you a longtime friend of mine since I've been in the position, Jack Oelfke, in the National Park uniform. Hey, Jack. Jack is the Chief of Natural and Cultural Resources at North Cascades National Park. He spent 20 years in the North Cascades and has spent significant time working also at Glacier National Park, Isle Royal, beautiful place up in Michigan on Lake Superior. Shorter periods at both Olympic and Grand Canyon. So he's had the opportunity to really serve in some incredible places. He feels very fortunate to have spent his entire career working to protect natural resources in our parks. And in his free time, he is truly happiest when he is out hiking a trail or cross-country skiing or snowshoeing with family and friends. Also with us is Austin Baldwin. Austin, thank you for joining us. Austin fell in love with with national parks as a seasonal employee at Yellowstone and Denali in college. He fell in love with a park ranger who he later married. Now, 20 years later, Austin hopes his work can help keep the park special for his children and future generations. He's a little nervous today that the kids might pop in the background, but they won't. Austin's a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Idaho Water Science Center, where he studies water quality issues such as mining disturbances and contaminants of emerging concern. Austin became interested in microplastics, fascinating topic we're going to learn more about today, in 2013, and has since been involved in several studies of microplastic sources, transport, fate, and biological uptake around the US. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my friends, and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you, Lori. I will try and start up my PowerPoint here. Okay, so thanks again, Lori. Welcome everybody. Thanks to Washington's National Park Fund for hosting this platform where we can come to you with these various topics and issues, as well as support for the project itself. So I'm just going to take 5 or 10 minutes very quickly to provide some broad overview of air quality and some research I've helped facilitate regarding air quality through the Park Service, kind of in my career. I want to first note on this first slide, the Clean Air Act of 1970, that big piece of significant environmental legislation passed, 50 years ago now, that really addressed some rough air quality issues that were going on in the country, and it's been instrumental in helping clean up the air some. And these crazy times we are living in, I just wanted to mention the coronavirus and the interesting insights with this economic global downturn, what that's meant for air quality of all things. As you've perhaps been tracking in the news, with a significant lessening of carbon emissions, you can see in places such as Los Angeles here, this picture, the left half from a year ago and then just a month ago, and what a dramatic difference in the haze and air pollution. And I was reading where Los Angeles itself at the current time is regarded as one of the cleanest cities, major cities in the world for air quality. And I've never in my life thought I'd be saying something like that. It's obviously very temporary, but it's just kind of an interesting insight into carbon emissions and what might be. So one of the early air quality related research projects I was involved in is when I worked at Idaho National Park. As Lori mentioned, I spent 11 years there in the 90s and early 2000s. This beautiful wild island park in Lake Superior, more remote than the Washington parks here that we all enjoy in Washington state. And you see the arrow there. I got to spend 11 of my summers on a small island with my family and a few others working in this park. Great place. But again, a remote place, but it was an eye-opening experience for me when some research I helped get going started to show that this herbicide called atrazine, it's an herbicide used on cornfields in the Midwest in particular, and we were tracking, the researchers I should say, were tracking how cornfields down here in Kansas would get, the herbicide would get caught up in the air currents and be deposited on us in Isle Royal and Lake Superior, some 600 plus miles away. Kind of eye-opening, kind of scary actually. And then I left Isle Royal in 2003 and came out here back to the North Cascades and right into this Western Airborne Contaminants Assessment Project, a very broad look at Western national parks in particular, and on this topic of airborne contaminants and what might be present in our ecosystems here. So, and Olympic, Rainier, and North Cascades were all a part of that big project. And so the picture you see shown here is of someone for sampling snow, and you can see that first bullet. We were sampling air and snow, water, fish, and various components of the ecosystem for contaminants. 150 of these potential toxic contaminants were being looked for. We found 73, or the researchers found 73, and the most of concern there, you can see the 6 listed in the third bullet there, and mercury and dieldrin in particular were considered to be of greatest ecological concern in our parks. Here in the park itself, we've had a long-running air quality monitoring program. You can see the 4 things that we monitor for, and nitrogen, visibility, and ozone are 3 where what we are experiencing are at levels of concern. So again, we are a big park, a somewhat remote park, but air quality concerns exist there. I note that that link there on the bottom, you can go to that and look for the results of any of these here at North Cascades, as well as any park in the country, actually. It's a great website if you have interest in air quality issues throughout the National Park Service. And then one more here to note, there was a project out of Clemson University in the 2015 to 17, that specifically focused on microplastics on beaches in national park units. So you can see in the purple dots there, the study spanned all the way from Alaska down the west coast, on the east coast, the Great Lakes states, and in the Pacific Islands, looking for microplastics on beaches. And I can't see it myself because it's hidden, but you see that big red arrow over on the right side of the screen there. That's pointing to Olympic National Park and the levels of microplastics they were finding there. pretty high, a fair bit of concern. So to wrap up my little part here, you can think about this, and you think about throwing up your hands. Is there really anything we can do about these pollutants that are coming from all over the place? And I specifically look at that second bullet I put in there. I maintain that we have a real moral and ethical responsibility to understand and document what's going on in our parks, what might be impacting our parks, and certainly an issue of air quality that has global health concerns for humans as well. It's we need to know what's going on in the parks, and thus we come to this research project that Austin's about to start talking to you about, microplastics. It popped up on our radar just a few years ago, and now working with Washington's National Park Fund, we're hoping to start some work this summer. So as I'm about to pass this off to Austin, I'll say I'll give 10 points to anybody who can tell me where these beautiful lakes are in the North Cascades. They're in the north unit of the Cascades. So maybe at the end you guys can guess. But I'm going to pass now to Austin Baldwin. Lori introduced Austin, and Austin, I'll stop sharing on my end and let you put your screen up.
Okay, you seeing my screen, Jack?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. All right, thanks for the introduction, Jack. So I'm going to shift the topic now to microplastics. And I'm going to talk about, let's see. I'm going to give an overview on what microplastics are, where do they come from, what risk they pose to fish and other aquatic organisms, and then at the end we'll talk about microplastics in remote locations such as North Cascades National Park. So first off, we need to talk about what microplastics are. So microplastics are any plastic particle from about 5 millimeters down to 100 nanometers. So that's a really big range of sizes. 100 nanometers is about the size of a virus. So that's getting very small. Less than that, we actually have what we call nanoplastics, which are obviously much smaller still, down to the molecular level. We know that nanoplastics exist in the environment and that microplastics break down to nanoplastics, but nanoplastics are actually so small that we don't have a way of measuring them currently. And actually a lot of microplastics we still can't really measure. So most labs can only measure microplastics in the range of about 100 microns to about 5 millimeters. So that's about the size of a human hair to a piece of rice. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is this range of plastics. Just know that as you get to smaller and smaller sizes, the numbers of plastic particles increase exponentially. So what we see in this range is a small fraction of what exists in these smaller ranges. Okay, so we have a poll question, and that is, where do microplastics come from? So vehicle tires, synthetic clothing, breakdown of litter, paint, or all of the above. So if you can enter in your vote, we'll give you 30 seconds or so, and then we'll tally up and see what you guys have come up with. Oh, look at that. Okay, so the results show that 96% of you, 48 of you, selected all of the above, which is correct. And the other couple of you selected synthetic clothing, which is also correct, and that's a really big and important source. So good job, everybody. I guess that was too easy. Okay, so when we talk about microplastics, we often characterize them by their shape, which we also call their type. So I'm just going to introduce the different types or shapes of microplastics and where they might be coming from. So one is what we call lines. That's coming from things like nets, ropes, fishing line. Beads and pellets are anything that's spherical. This might come from personal care products like exfoliating face scrubs and toothpastes. It may also come from pre-production pellets, which are the materials used to make larger plastic items. Foams from things like foam coffee cups and takeout containers and packing foam. Films, anything like sheet-like, thin and sheet-like from things like plastic bags and wrappers. Fragments is kind of a catch-all category for just broken up pieces of larger plastic that don't fit into these other categories. Fibers from clothing, textiles, carpet, upholstery, etc. And lastly, tire particles, which can be directly from tires wearing down, which, you know, a lot of people don't think about, but when you get your brand new tires with that nice deep tread, and several years later, that tread has been worn down and you need to get new tires, all that material is going somewhere, and often it's going into the nearby stream. This can also be from crumb rubber, like on sports fields, like it's shown here, like on synthetic sports fields like AstroTurf, and rubberized asphalt, which is actually an asphalt that they're starting to use more and more that has ground up pieces of tires built into it, made into it. Okay, so lots of different types of microplastics from lots of different sources. So the really big question right now is, what risk do microplastics pose to aquatic organisms, if any? We know that microplastics are eaten by aquatic organisms. We've seen that in over 100 different species, everything from marine mammals to birds, fish, turtles, invertebrates, corals, you name it. Pretty much everywhere we look, we see organisms eating plastic. But is there a risk? So the potential risks are both mechanical and chemical. So by mechanical, I mean an organism eats a piece of plastic and maybe the plastic clogs their feeding appendage, or it causes stomach ulceration, or it gives them a false sense of satiation, meaning they think their stomach is full, but it's really full of plastic, and that doesn't give any nutrition. So those are mechanical risks. And then on the chemical risk side, what I mean by that is plastic has all kinds of different additives built into it when it's manufactured for different purposes. So sometimes they put flame retardants in plastics, alkophenols, antimicrobials, plasticizers, styrenes, antioxidants like bisphenol A. All kinds of different chemicals are added to plastic to give it different properties. Some of these chemicals are toxic, some are endocrine disrupting, and the concern is that if a fish or other organism eats the plastic, that these chemicals may be able to leach out of the plastic and into the organism. So these are chemicals that are intentionally built into plastics. There's also chemicals that sorb onto the surface of plastic when the plastic is out in the environment, say it's floating along in the stream or the lake. Chemicals that are in the water, often they don't like to just be free floating in the water. They want to attach to something. And so if they see a piece of plastic floating by, they'll attach to that piece of plastic and they'll accumulate on the surface. This includes things like PCBs, DDT, PAHs, also pathogens and metals. So again, the concern is that when an organism eats this piece of plastic, that these chemicals, pathogens, and metals might be stripped off and get transferred to the organism. So like I said, this is a really hot topic of research right now. There's been a lot of lab studies in recent years on trying to understand the effects of plastic ingestion by different organisms. This is just a very short list, but some of the effects that people have reported are reproductive effects, toxic effects to liver and other organs. At really small sizes, microplastics can actually pass through the gut wall and into the bloodstream, the circulatory system, and move all through the body and cause cell damage. So lots of labs have shown negative effects. Some studies have shown no effects. So it's still pretty poorly understood what the effects are, how much plastic needs to be ingested, what type of plastic, what size of plastic, etc. And in the natural environment, the effects are pretty unclear because it's hard to do a controlled study like this in the natural environment. So the natural environment, there's lots of different stressors. There's plastics and there's other stressors. So understanding the stress caused by the plastic versus other stressors can be hard to untangle. Microplastics reach aquatic environments in several different ways. One of them is through wastewater treatment plant discharges. So for example, when you wash your fleece jacket in the laundry, that jacket is going to shed thousands of plastic fibers into the wastewater, which goes, leaves your house into the pipes to the treatment plant. A lot of those fibers are captured by the treatment plant, most of them, but some get discharged into streams and lakes. The ones that do get captured by the treatment plant, that's called the biosolids of the treatment plant, the stuff that they capture. And often that biosolids material gets applied over land, like is shown here. So you have this pretty high concentration of microplastics getting applied on fields. And then of course it can be picked up by the wind and blown around, or it can wash into the nearby streams. Stormwater runoff is another pathway to the aquatic environment. Think about, again, your car tire bits, pieces of trash that get put on the street and then driven over and broken up into small pieces and then run into stormwater drains. And there are other pathways as well that we're going to talk about momentarily. Okay, so here's our second poll question. How do microplastics reach remote alpine environments where few people visit? Birds and squirrels, airplane exhaust, groundwater and springs, or that last one is supposed to be just atmospheric deposition, not groundwater and springs and atmospheric deposition. So cast your vote. Okay, I guess the votes are in. I don't see the results yet. There we go. So 82% of you said atmospheric deposition. We also had a couple votes for birds and squirrels and groundwater and springs. Atmospheric deposition was the answer I was going for. And that's where we're gonna head now. If I can get that to move. Okay. So for the rest of the talk, we're going to talk about atmospheric deposition as a pathway to remote environments like North Cascades. But we're going to start in Denver, Boulder, and the Front Range of Colorado. So this is a study that I was involved in that came out a couple of years ago, looking at microplastics in rain. The funny thing is, it was not designed as a study of microplastics in rain. It was designed as a study of nutrients in rain. So these locations on the map here show the sampling locations. You can see that most of them are in the Denver, Boulder area. But then we had one site up in Rocky Mountain National Park up at 10,000 feet, and a couple other sites kind of on the slope. So the way this study worked is we had these samplers that we had a sensor that would detect rain, and when rain was detected, this lid would flip over and rain would collect in the bucket, and then when the rain ended, the lid would close. So we were just getting rain samples, and then that water that we collected, the rainwater, would be filtered on filters like this. And when Greg Weatherby, who was leading the study, he started looking at these samples under the microscope, he started seeing things like this. In a lot of the samples, 90% of the samples had either plastic fibers, like you see in these top two pictures, all different colors, or chunks of plastic fragments, like you see in these bottom two pictures. Over 90% of the rain samples had these plastics in them, including up in Rocky Mountain National Park at 10,000 feet. We even saw in some of the samples what we are pretty sure are tire particles. So this is a scanning electron microscope image of a tire particle, and this is from a sample from Loch Vale in Rocky Mountain National Park. So, based on this study, it appears to be that microplastics are in rain, and even tire particles are in rain, which is kind of scary. All right, now shifting to North Cascades. And around the same time as that previous study, 2018, we had this idea that the atmosphere might be a pathway for microplastics to be reaching remote environments. But there was little or no information on whether that was true or not. So we felt like if we could sample snowpack in a high alpine environment, where the only possible source of plastic would be the atmosphere, that would give us an idea of how much plastic might be coming from the atmosphere. Because this is an environment that people are not up there skiing or anything, or at least not very many people. So whatever plastic we found up there, we could be pretty confident came from the atmosphere. So Mike Larrabee with the Park Service collected a few snow cores in 2018 and 2019 from a couple of different glaciers in North Cascades. He cored down, here's a picture, he cored down a few meters worth of snow core, and then melted that snow core, and then we looked at it for microplastics. And here's what we came up with. These are the 3 different samples we collected in 2018 and 2019, 3 samples so far. And then here's the concentration of plastic particles per liter of meltwater. So concentrations range from about 10 to 30 pieces of plastic per liter of snow melt water. And you can see from the colors, the vast majority of those plastics were plastic fibers. So this was really surprising to us because these concentrations are actually about 100 to 1,000 times greater than what we commonly see in rivers. Even in places like Detroit, Milwaukee, like urban rivers, concentrations are about 100 to 1,000 times less than this right here. These concentrations are comparable to what we see in urban runoff, like straight off the street. So we were really surprised by these samples. So we're hoping to be able to collect more and investigate this further. The concern here is, and this is kind of a schematic model here. So the concern is that the microplastics deposit up at these alpine environments, and then as the snow melts, the microplastics get transported down into these high alpine lakes that are relatively pristine. When the microplastics reach these lakes, a lot of the microplastics are negatively buoyant. So because of their density, if given the opportunity, they will settle out and accumulate in the sediment. So what we think is likely happening is these microplastics are accumulating in places like this, and of course each year more and more accumulate in that sediment. And then microplastics can enter the food web via benthic feeding fish and macroinvertebrates in the lake. So the Park Service has proposed a study to better understand this pathway for environmental uptake of microplastics across North Cascades National Park. So this proposed study has two objectives. The first is to quantify microplastic load in winter snowpack and the variability of that load across the Cascades. So basically to do more sampling like we did already, but in more locations. So they'll sample 4 full-depth snow cores, sample full-depth snow cores at 4 alpine basins across North Cascades in early spring during peak snowpack. And by doing the full-depth snow core, by that we mean the annual snow core, the snow from the previous year, then they can get a sense of how much deposited in the last year. And the second objective is to quantify microplastic accumulation in the alpine lakes, which, like I said, the lakes, because of the density of microplastics and their tendency to settle out, lakes may accumulate microplastics melting out of the snowpack and are therefore potential locations of uptake to the food web by macroinvertebrates and fish. So the proposal is to sample alpine lake sediment in the same 4 basins sampled for snowpack microplastics. The proposed basins and lakes to be sampled are shown in this map here. You can see that they're distributed across the park to broadly represent the different regions of the park. They're all located downwind of the I-5 metro corridor, which includes Seattle, Everett, Bellingham, and Vancouver, BC. There's also substantial agriculture, both east-west and north-south of this region. So if you'd like more information on that proposed study or on microplastics in North Cascades in general, please feel free to reach out to folks at North Cascades, Mike Larrabee, Carmen Archambault, or Ashley Rawhauser. You can also reach out to me at the USGS Idaho Water Science Center. And that's all I've got. So thank you very much for joining us. And hopefully we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Austin. Nice job, both of you. We have a few questions in the box here, and I'm going to touch on some of them. I think this may have been answered, but how does food packaging add to the microplastics that you're seeing?
Yeah, so food packaging can definitely be a source, and partly it depends on how the food packaging is dealt with, is disposed of. But really, any reduction in food packaging that we can do is helpful. Especially that the food packaging that you use it for like 30 minutes to get your food from the restaurant to your house, and then you throw it away. Finding alternatives to that kind of single-use, really short-use plastic could be really helpful to reducing microplastics in the environment.
Thank you. Jack, this one's for you. And somebody wants to know if you have a favorite park of the parks that you've worked at. A common question that rangers hear, but this person says her son has been lucky enough, I assume, her son has been lucky enough to work at both Isle Royal and North Cascades. They are from Michigan as well.
Well, that honestly, and I'm being sincere, that's tough. I'm a country boy from Minnesota, so Isle Royal really took me by surprise. I'd never been there until I worked there, and it certainly is up there. But honestly, it's probably Glacier, and I say that in good part because it's the first mountains I literally ever saw in my life, Glacier National Park. and I met the woman who became my wife in the backcountry. So I have a lot of emotional ties to it as well.
That's great, thank you. What microplastics are found in vertebrate scat? What is the toxin load? Any thoughts?
In this invertebrate scat, I know that people have looked at scat, including human, and they did find microplastics in human. The types of microplastics I'm not sure of. You know, it's easy to describe the morphology, the shape of the plastic, but it's harder to know where that plastic actually came from. So fibers are what we see a lot of in like fish gut and different organisms. Fibers are what we see most of. As far as the toxics load, that's a difficult question, because right now the way we analyze for microplastics, it kind of strips chemicals off of it. So understanding what chemicals are on the plastic is kind of a difficult question. You have to have a lot of plastic to be able to answer that question.
That's a pretty good question, very thoughtful. Are there water filters that a backpacker hiker might use capable of filtering out these microplastics? Is that been invented, like the nanoplastics?
That's a good question. I can't remember what size most filters use. I know that a lot of filters don't filter out like the virus size, if I'm not mistaken. So you probably get nanoplastics passing through some of those filters. But certainly the larger microplastics are going to get filtered out of using a standard backpacker filter.
Well, we're not going to go to that one. Would it be possible to sample older glacial ice and learn what plastic concentration were present in years past?
That's something that I would love to do. I think it would be a really cool thing to be able to look at glacial ice, and then you can, like the person said, you can see how the concentrations have changed over time. You know, you would expect prior to 1950 or something, you would have virtually none, and then increasing to now.
Mm-hmm.
People have done that for sediment.
Excuse me, go ahead.
People have done that for sediment, like sediment cores, and seen that.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have one more comment. One of the participants is interested in having you present at River Rally 2021. So we'll pass on that information to you when we're all done. We want to thank you, both of you, very much for the time and commitment and for the work that you do. It's fascinating, highly needed, and the results will be good once we continue to learn more. Nice job, both of you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everyone, we want to share with you that next week, if you know the musical Mountaineers, they are two fascinating individuals who hike up into the mountains at sunrise and surprise visitors if they're up there with some incredible music. And they'll be with us next week. And you'll hear their story as well as hear them perform. And then 2 weeks from today, we will be back at North Cascades National Park, and we'll be studying soundscapes. I'm especially excited about this one because I love tuning into birds in the early morning. So that will be another beautiful one. That's from 2 weeks from today, and the Musical Mountaineers are next week. You can sign up on our website. It's right there. And I just wanted to give one final shout out. We are raising money for this program right now, and we're approaching the top end of the goal. So if you're interested in helping us take it up and over the top, go online and make a contribution. And in the comment line, just put microplastics. We're grateful to all of you. We know we have many friends out in the audience, and you keep us going strong. Hope you're enjoying the program. Stay with us, virtual field trips. Have a nice afternoon and stay well, everyone. Thanks, Jack and Austin.